The brunette exhaled irritably, upset both by the defeat and by the fact that everything turned out this way with Pierre and Nomi. The audience roared and everyone shouted that their commander had won, and that was why he was the main one among them. Pierre stood up and said loudly that he proposed ending the welcome party at this point. He had had enough. The redhead also said that Theo was going to leave tomorrow, although they originally agreed to leave in a few days. The commander persistently asked the workers to clean the house and provide Theodore and Nomi with a separate room for the night. He leaned over to his friend and said that if it were up to him, he would have caused a commotion here, but he decided to show Theo a mercy. Pierre ordered Theodore to quietly leave the village with his companion while he was ready to close his eyes to it. And immediately after that, the red-haired man with a sharp movement snatched Nomi's white gloves from Theodore, squeezing them in his palms. He told the brunette to stop carrying something like that with him if he didn't want to die soon due to stupidity. Pierre looked intimidating, and Theodore lost all hope that he could calmly talk and explain everything to him. Soon, Nomi returned to the building, and she and Theo walked together to the bedroom, where one of the servants led them. Theo was upset that now they didn't even have time and had to leave the next morning. He thought that he should be glad that his friend did not kill him on the spot, so he should not take risks and leave as soon as possible. He followed the woman dejectedly, hanging his head, and Nomi followed him just as sadly. She could not forgive herself for the fact that, in fact, this village became like this because of her, having lost everything that was dear to her. Now she understood why Mr. Theo was so careful and immediately tried to hide Nomi's identity. Suddenly, the woman stopped and said that they had already arrived at the right bedroom, pointing to their room. Theo was at first surprised that they were given the same room for two, but the woman said that they were a couple. That's why it was so. The woman said mischievously that at first glance, the room might look bad, but the bed was excellent. A rather provocative atmosphere awaited them inside the room. There were rose petals and a large heart laid out on the bed. They even heated the bathroom, lit candles, and generally tried to create a romantic atmosphere in the bedroom. Theo was a little confused by this. He told Nomi that the bed was hers for the night, and he would lie on the sofa. Suddenly, Nomi started talking seriously and said that Olak had obviously left an indelible mark on this place. She sadly and guiltily said that she could no longer pretend that she knew nothing about what was happening. The guy's thoughts immediately flashed to Pierre's threats and how angry his friend was before saying goodbye. Theo excitedly asked Noemi if it was true that that idiot Pierre said something to Noemi that hurt or intimidated her. Instead of answering the question, the girl only coldly stated the fact that Theo knew everything, but said nothing. She was devastated, but she wanted to know now why Theodore didn't warn her in advance and explain the situation. The guy lowered his eyes guiltily and admitted that he saw nothing good in discussing this. But Nomi was shocked to the core and said that he should not have made the decision for her. The guy asked what it would do for her. It would only put them in an awkward position in front of everyone. The brunette added that Pierre also found out about everything. Therefore, they had to leave here at first rays of sun. But the girl suddenly said that she wanted to stay instead to save these people and make amends. Theo was starting to seethe and asked if the villagers really looked like they needed the saint's help. Emotionally, the guy completely stopped choosing expressions and said that it was good that they didn't try to harm her. Theo considered the only right decision to leave this place so as not to bring more trouble to himself and others. But the blonde stood her ground and said she didn't care. There had to be a way to help the city. Without thinking at all what he was saying, Theo irritably asked the girl if she really missed the time when she was a victim. He yelled at her and asked why she again chose a life in which a terrible, painful death awaited her. But despite the fact that Theodore so aggressively showed his accumulated emotions, Nomi did not even move. She told him it wasn't her decision back then, but things were different now. She was confident in her actions. The girl said that she had dared to escape from that life, but for some reason, she was still faced with old problems. Nomi said Theo told her the same thing as the priests. He told her to pretend she didn't know anything. Both the priests and Theo tried to convince her that Nomi could only help people through her inaction and silence. But this approach did not have any good results, but only destroyed other people's lives without even giving them a chance. Nomi guessed that Theo, like her family, must have thought of her as worthless and thought she could be pushed around. These words angered the guy even more. He tried to explain that those people were using her while he was helping her. And at that moment, it dawned on the guy, and he fell silent. Was he really any different from Nomi's family in his behavior? The girl quietly said that she was lucky enough to know the taste of freedom, but now she felt very bad. Because Theo tried to limit her and made all the decisions himself, she felt like she was back in the temple. The brunette realized that he was unable to continue this conversation, so he told Nomi to go to bed, and he needed to leave. When Theo left to get some fresh air, Nomi really decided to change clothes and go to bed. There was nothing else to do. She was angry and anxious, thoughts were constantly buzzing in her head, preventing her from falling asleep. Previously, she could only hide, telling people what awaited them, and this gave her no peace. Nomi was haunted by the fear that nothing could change, that everything could return to normal again. The girl closed her eyes, trying to calm herself and drive away bad thoughts. She had to fix everything. Nomi didn't even notice how she fell into a deep sleep, but soon woke up when she heard quiet music. She slowly opened her eyes, because the bright sunlight was disturbing her sleep. Is it really morning already? Opening her eyes, Nomi found that she was lying in a spacious clearing, among bright snow-white flowers. She sat down on the grass, trying to figure out where she was now. I just couldn't remember at all what happened. In front of her, she noticed a young man who was picking flowers, and at the same moment, he spoke to Nomi. The guy said that as soon as she left his arms, all sorts of difficulties began to appear on her path. He smiled patronizingly. Platinum hair, golden eyes, and a snake tattoo on his neck. The young man looked unusual. Nomi rose to her feet and cautiously asked who was standing in front of her and what he just meant. The blonde snapped his fingers and asked if Nomi was familiar with his appearance. He was amused by the girl's confusion. A little later, the young man said that, probably, because people talked about him, it was difficult to recognize him. Waving his staff, the guy, as if by magic, took on the guise of that same stone statue of God from the Bellin estate. Nomi froze in place. She couldn't believe her eyes. Everything that was happening was like a strange dream. The guy again assumed his usual appearance, and with a sly smile, told Nomi that he had sincerely been waiting for her to appear. He addressed her as his dear wife, and Nomi had no doubt that God Olak himself stood before her. Olak told Nomi that, to be honest, it hurt him to see her in such a state. He sarcastically asked if this life was really too cruel to become a bride. Olak said he was just starting to miss his wife, so he decided it was time to take her back. He asked Nomi to return to where she belonged and wait there for the moment when she could be in his arms. But contrary to all God's expectations, his wife told him that she would not return back under any circumstances. Olak asked her why she suddenly decided to do this, and Nomi honestly admitted that there was something wrong in her life. The young man asked her if she was really complaining about the fate that her God had given her. How dare she? Nomi was not afraid to speak her truth even to the Lord, and said that being a saint, she turned the village into ruins. Knowing that such a big mistake lay on her conscience, she would never be able to return to her old life. But Olak did not want to listen to all these rantings, and tapping his staff, asked if she really didn't want to be his wife. Was his own wife not going to follow the laws that God had created for her? The colors around began to thicken, and the atmosphere became more and more tense with each passing second. From a smiling young man, Olak instantly turned into a cold-blooded tyrant. He never gave Nomi the right to choose. No matter how stubborn the girl was, God reminded her that everything here happened only according to his personal desire. All the people in the world were just puppets that acted according to the script he had written for this world. If Olak wanted her to live, then she would indeed live according to his will. If Olak suddenly wanted her to die, she would have to do it, and she would have no influence on it. He coldly asked her if she really thought that he would make concessions just because she was endowed with special powers. The girl tried to somehow influence God and make him hear her, guided by the Holy Scriptures. It said that God gave birth to man and breathed his will into him. Nomi and Olak said this in one voice. The guy looked at his wife with a crazy look and said that this was so. It was his will, but certainly not hers. If she didn't believe it, she could very well see it for herself. Then she would understand whether she could really be free. He clarified whether the girl wanted to do something for the affected village. It seems she wanted to give back to the residents what they had lost. Olak laughed. covering his mouth with his hand, and his laughter gave goosebumps. He suggested that it was possible to return the water to them. Suddenly, the young man said that Nomi could even do it, but his tone did not inspire confidence at all. The man promised that if his wife agreed to stay with him, he would turn the damaged village into an oasis. But after that, he added that he had one condition. Nothing could be given for nothing. Residents could regain water, that very precious gift that they had lost due to a terrible accident. But in exchange for this gift, one of the villagers had to pay with his life and die immediately. Enjoying the position he was putting Nomi in, Olak wanted to see how she handled this difficult choice. He wanted to check whether the girl had the power to change the destinies that he had prepared for people in this world. The blonde desperately blurted out that she would never risk human lives. She considered it wrong. Olak told her to calm down, because no one really gave her the right to choose. This was too much luxury. He asked if she would rather lose everything that was so dear to her instead. Olak recalled that he was always honest with Nomi and promised that he always does what he says. He always kept his word, even if it might cause his wife to grieve. The young man unexpectedly kissed her forehead and finally told Nomi to rest, wishing her to have good dreams. From now on, she will have to fight his prophecy. He easily pushed her forward, and the ground under Nomi's feet began to disappear. The guy waved goodbye to her and said with a smile that they would definitely meet again soon. Nomi was completely lost in space and felt herself starting to fall somewhere, not feeling anything around her. But this feeling soon ended, and she jumped up on her bed, as if waking up from this terrible dream. She again found herself in the bed assigned to her, and for some reason Pierre was nearby, excited by her cry. After a couple of moments, Nomi was able to calm down a little and asked the red-haired man what he was doing here. Pierre explained that he was just passing along the corridor nearby when he suddenly heard a scream and could not help but enter. He walked around his possessions with a spear, when suddenly frightened female squeals cut through the silence of the deep night. The guy got up from the bed and handed Nomi her gloves, without explaining or asking anything more about this incident. He also had no desire to discuss the whole story with the flowers, so, avoiding conflict, he wished her good night. But before Pierre had time to leave the room, quite large stones fell right from the ceiling, creating a lot of noise. Nomi frightenedly called Mr. Pierre. She was alarmed and did not understand at all what was happening. Pierre himself did not fully understand why the ceiling suddenly crumbled, even at that moment, when nothing happened. Nomi's heart began to beat alarmingly, and an alarming guess came to her mind that this could be the work of Olak. God's feigned tenderness did not bode well. Most likely he started his insidious game right now. The girl stood rooted to the spot and looked at the debris on the floor. She couldn't even imagine how this game would turn out. Pierre and Noemi sat on the floor, collecting stones that had fallen from the ceiling, and Pierre asked her not to pay attention to it at night. He said that she and Theo had to leave the tree tomorrow anyway, so they didn't have to worry about the rocks. Unexpectedly for the owner, Nomi decided to ask if she and Theodore could stay in the city for a few more days. Pierre turned away and asked if she really thought that he would agree to this. She said she knew why they hated her. The redhead said that it was good that Nomi understood that she had no right to ask for forgiveness, but he still disagreed. It was precisely because Nomi was guilty, and also knew about her guilt, that she should have left quickly and not lingered. Noemi thought with bitterness that Pierre's anger towards her was as inevitable as the fate that Olak had laid out for her. But the girl firmly decided that she could no longer live as before, doing nothing and sitting in the shadows. She turned to the redhead again and asked him to let her do the best she could while she was here. Nomi wanted to use her ability to find what the villagers needed most. She didn't need their forgiveness. They could be angry and curse her. But nevertheless, she sincerely wanted to help. She begged them not to ask her to pretend she hadn't made a mistake in the past. It would only make things worse. Meanwhile, Theodore sat in the courtyard of the mansion on the stone steps and thought about everything that he had said to Nomi in the room. He admitted to himself that he really took advantage of the girl and could not understand why only he felt so bad. An inner voice screamed that Theo was sad because Nomi wanted to sacrifice herself again. On the other hand, an inner voice was wondering if Theo really should have been somehow angry about this. These contradictions in his own head drove Theo crazy, and he didn't know whether Nomi was sorry or read that it was none of his business. Theo was so angry with himself that he was already groaning in irritation while sitting on the steps, which frightened everyone around him. The guy wanted to know why everything inside him seemed to turn upside down when it came to Nomi. He replayed in his head the girl's words that she felt next to him now, the same way as in the temple. The brunette's sad thoughts were interrupted by a strange, unexpected roar that was heard on one of the upper floors. He stood up from the steps and looked around, trying to figure out where the noise came from and what had just happened. People here at such moments said that the oasis was crying, but the same could not happen in reality. Although Theo even wondered if he should have put his ear to the ground, suddenly the conversations of the residents were somehow true. But the guy decided that the earth could cry as much as it wanted, and he needed to apologize. He returned to the building and, walking up the stairs, rehearsed how he would apologize to Nomi. The guy was even surprised at himself, because he rarely asked for forgiveness, but it was important for him to do everything on time. As his grandmother said, whether it was money or feelings, if the deadline expired, everything had to be returned with interest. Approaching the door of their bedroom, Theo noticed Pierre's spear on the floor in the corridor, and this could not help but alert him. He opened the door to the room and was surprised to notice that his friend was having some kind of conversation with his wife, which he did not expect. Meanwhile, large fragments of the collapsed ceiling lay on the floor, covering almost the entire carpet. Seeing such a picture, Theo, of course, could not draw any positive conclusions, and his blood immediately boiled. He attacked his friend, deciding that Pierre had somehow dared to encroach on Nomi's safety. The girl hastened to reassure the brunette and assured him that he had completely misunderstood everything, and Pierre was not to blame. Stuttering, the fair-haired one explained that Pierre came in response to the noise, and then the ceiling collapsed on the red-haired one. Pierre said that he needed to return her thing to Noemi, which is why he came to them so late at night, completely out of the blue. He once again reminded Nomi of his opinion, but said that if she decided to stay, then he saw no point in stopping her. The redhead told her to remember that if people found out that she was a saint, they would not hesitate to kill them both. Without saying another word, Pierre headed towards the exit of the room, pointedly brushing Theodore with his shoulder as he passed by. When the young man finally left, leaving them alone, Theo asked Nomi if she really intended to stay here. She said she wanted to find a new source of water so that the land could become fertile again. Despite Theo's fears and words that it was dangerous, the girl begged him for 4 more days to try. She promised that during this time they would not be caught. She herself would make sure that nothing happened to the brunette. Nomi recalled that on the day he proposed to her, Theo said that now she would live as she wanted. She no longer had the desire to be a saint, whom even Fergert himself had once despised and mocked. She no longer wanted to be a saint who received flowers from other countries, so she asked him to give her a chance. Nomi thought that perhaps she should have apologized to him first, but she stated her wishes again. And Theodore himself thought that he had come here to ask for forgiveness. He could not begin to resist her will again. The girl asked him for only 4 days to get a chance to live a life that would suit both of them. Theo sighed and eventually gave his consent to her plan, through internal struggle, but the guy did it. He said that he was giving the girl exactly 4 days to implement the plan, and then they would have to leave the village. The next day, Nomi met with Pierre, but the dialogue did not go well, and they silently watched the children play. The red-haired man asked if Theo would join them, to which Nomi replied that he would consider their future path. She thought that Theodore agreed with her, but was clearly angry with himself, so he obviously wouldn't come now. Pierre was surprised that Theo stayed, knowing that there would be no benefit from it. Why did the friend go so far? Noemi asked why Pierre decided to accompany her. He said that a lot of things could happen while she was wandering around. Getting closer to the point, the red-haired man asked how the girl was going to find water for them with the help of holy power. He asked if she would touch the residents of their city like the parishioners of her church. Then what other ways were there? But Nomi joyfully asked if she could really read visions from the city's residents in order to figure everything out. She offered to gather as many people as possible, but Pierre did not understand how he should explain this sudden gathering to people. The fact that they could not gather a crowd did not deprive Nomi of her confidence at all, and she said that she would then examine everyone separately. Pierre tried to understand why Nomi liked Theo so much. She was enthusiastic, but not at all organized. Nevertheless, they set out together to implement her plan. First, the girl came into contact with women workers at the market. She didn't tell them about herself or specifically try to touch them, but instead offered to help them with their chores. The girls agreed with pleasure because an extra pair of hands never hurts, and Nomi got to work. And while she was helping sort through the dry grass, she allegedly accidentally touched the worker's hand with her hand, receiving a vision. Pierre noticed this and carefully watched the girl, expecting to understand from her reaction how things were going with them. But after the vision, Nomi became somewhat absent-minded, and her positive attitude became noticeably less, which was alarming. After that, the fair-haired girl took the sorted greens to the cook, who was just boiling water in a large saucepan. Passing the bowl of herbs, Nomi touched this woman, once again seeing a short vision and a clue. A little later, the girl took the finished lunch to the male workers, also discreetly reading each prediction. But no matter how hard Nomi tried to look calm and not show her worries, her mood worsened. She couldn't why all her visions had the same meaning, and yet they were all simply terrifying. Why did she only see a bad future in every vision? In all her predictions, the inhabitants died in agony. Really, in order to find water, they really had to pay not even one, but many human lives. It turned out that this frightening scenario was the very future prescribed by God Olak. Can this be changed? She was brought out of her thoughts by Pierre, who came up from behind and told her to be careful, because there were quicksand nearby. While the red-haired man carefully pushed her aside, holding her by the shoulders, another vision came to the girl. Even Pierre, in her prediction, was supposed to die in the near future, and this realization frightened the girl even more. The sensitive commander noticed from Nomi's behavior that something was wrong and asked if she wanted to tell him about it. The fair-haired woman did not hide the truth and told her new acquaintance that all the inhabitants of the village faced the same fate. It seemed as if death was the only possible future for them, and nothing could be changed about it. She didn't know if all these visions really had to do with the search for water, or if Olak was just threatening her like that. Pierre asked the girl if there was any other way to get new visions and see a little more. At that moment, it dawned on the girl, and she remembered that when she kissed Mr. Teo, there were a lot of visions. Nomi said that perhaps through another touch, not on the hand, but through a kiss, she could see more. Meanwhile, Theodore decided to go outside to join Nomi's work, but there was no trace of her. In the place where the girl was before, now only the children remained, who had been playing here from the very beginning. The guy hoped that the fair-haired woman did not leave the village unaccompanied, and without warning him, Theo turned around at the childish voice when the children called him to kick the ball with them. Pierre said he was good at this, but the dark-haired man refused them, saying that he was busy now, and with an important look told the guys to look more carefully at their feet. The guys' ears were unpleasantly struck by the words that the children had heard rumors in the village that Theo had a bad character. Such impudence angered the young man, and he wanted to scold the brave children, but they quickly disappeared from sight, laughing as they did so. The children ran out laughing into the next street, so that Theo would certainly not chase them and scold them. And while they were running across the yard, passing the ball, some stranger stopped him with his foot, appearing in front of them. It was a boy unknown to them, and wearing a long cape and hood. He greeted his peers without looking up. He smiled crookedly, revealing the sharp fangs that adorned his grin. The boy just got bored. Therefore, he invited the guys to play ball together. But it was not just a boy, but Olak himself under the guise of a child. Meanwhile, Pierre was trying to understand whether he had misheard and whether Nomi really spoke to him about the kiss as a method. She invited the guy to kiss, like she and Theo, when she also had many visions. It's not serious, but it's useful. After kissing Theo, the visions were many and clear, so she thought that she should kiss someone local. Pierre thought that it was customary for them to kiss each other only when they met, on the cheek or hand, but definitely not on the lips. He tried to understand why a kiss was something so simple for Nomi, and why he was even seriously thinking about it. Pierre said that kissing a married woman was not allowed, but Noemi convinced him that it was only to see the future. The red-haired one told her that the people of her country were ready to do anything to get a prediction from her. But here, everything is different. In Ceylon, she was a simple townswoman who had to respect local customs and not do strange things. Nomi said that this was the only way. But Pierre firmly said that then we can assume that nothing worked out. The girl sadly lowered her eyes, upset that the red-haired man had deprived her of such a chance, but finally agreed. She said that then she would find some other way, and Pierre was amazed that Nomi still wanted to help them. He didn't want to believe Theo's words that the girl was not to blame for the tragedy, but still decided to make concessions to her. Pierre said that since a kiss could really help, and she insisted so much, then she could kiss him for the sake of this matter. She asked if she really could kiss the captain, and he replied that he was also a resident of the country. There was no difference. The guy looked displeased at how the girl doubted when it came to kissing someone who knew everything about her. But it only seemed to him that the girl was shrouded in doubt. In fact, she did not hesitate to take his face with her palms. She was excited and happily thanked the redhead for agreeing. They had to do this. The girl apologized in advance for her action, and at that very second pressed herself to the commander's lips, feeling herself gaining strength. She closed her eyes, and the first thing she saw in front of her was the water that completely surrounded her body. With jubilation in her heart, the girl saw that there was water in Pierre's future after all. Not all was lost. In a vision, Pierre looked fascinated at his reflection in the clear and clean water, not believing his eyes. But there was another vision in which Nomi and Pierre were already together in the middle of the forest and chopping wood. She saw a happy future, which means she couldn't lose hope that everything would work out, even their relationship. But there was another, rather ambiguous vision, where Pierre was holding a crown in his hands, and a frightened Theo stood next to him. A moment later, this vision gave way to another, more colorful one, where Noemi and Pierre were babysitting small children. This ended the series of predictions, as the red-haired man carefully pulled away from the girl's lips. Pierre even turned all red. He anxiously apologized for interrupting her. He simply couldn't do it anymore due to embarrassment. The girl said that this was enough, and she saw everything. She even saw her marriage and children. But that was not the main thing now, so Nomi only told the guy that she saw the cave in her prediction. And most importantly, there was water in this cave, which meant the village had a chance of salvation. She and Pierre hurried to quickly return to the main square, and as soon as they saw Theo, they immediately called him to their place. Theo turned around and, not without a bit of jealousy, noticed that all this time that he had been looking for her, Nomi had been with Pierre. The brunette asked where they were. They said that they would watch the locals, but the out-of-breath Nomi interrupted him. She took a deep breath of fresh air and blurted out that she had just seen a cave in a vision, and there was water in it. But Pierre said that this was excluded, because there were no places nearby that looked like a cave. Theo took in the information in slow motion, so Pierre explained more calmly that Nomi's vision was of water. Meanwhile, Nomi was confused, because of Pierre's words that there were no caves nearby. This was impossible. If the redhead wasn't wrong, then what kind of place did she see in her prediction? But Theo was not going to give up so early, and told the couple that if there was no cave, then they needed to find a similar place. Theodore had no doubt that Nomi's visions never lie. Therefore, it was impossible to deny them, but it was necessary to act. He asked his wife to calmly remember all the details. There must be something that could be the key to finding this place. Noticing Noemi's sadness, Pierre said that she saw what she wanted. What went wrong again? The girl told the guys what Olak had warned her about. They could only find the cave if someone died. She constantly saw death in the residents' future. Everyone has only death and nothing more. It was connected with water. Theo asked if Nomi was sure of her words. Maybe if you look again, something will change. Pierre besieged his friend and reminded him that the brunette himself said that his wife's visions never lied, so there is no doubt. The red-haired one asked the girl if someone should die, then whether it could be only one person or not. Pierre said that he had to find out, because he was going to risk his life to save the village. Theodore did not at all expect such an act on the part of his friend right now. He was dumbfounded and outraged by such a decision, but the captain was unshakable in his choice. He said it was time to take advantage of the life Theo saved. He remembered events that happened a long time ago, when there was fierce struggle and war in the country. Pierre at that time was already a young knight and risked himself every day, defending the country from enemies. One day, as a result of a particularly fierce battle, the guy was wounded due to which he could not even move. He was exhausted and could not go further to save himself, and there was no one around whom he could ask for help. But Pierre was very lucky that when he had already lost all hope, Theo came across him, who saved him. The guy didn't remember how he passed out, but he woke up in a cold sweat in a room unfamiliar to him. Someone bandaged his wound and brought him home, putting him to bed so that the guy could gain strength and rest. Having risen a little, the red-haired man noticed that some people were standing and talking not far from the bed. It was a young guy and an elderly woman. The second told the guy, who was Theo, that it was good that he brought Pierre. Because of his wound, Pierre could not even move, so he could only hope that there were no enemies nearby. While he was thinking about this and trying to fully return to consciousness, people had already seen that he had woken up. They immediately looked away from their conversation, and two pairs of blue eyes stared at Pierre, assessing his condition. A little later, the red-haired man was even able to find the strength to get up to drink the water that was brought to him. He was immensely grateful to the kind people for saving him, but he could not relax, promising that he would repay them for their help. Taking the flask of water from the guy's hands, the elderly woman said that he should have hurry up then. The wise woman warned that if Pierre was late, then over time, the feeling would only accumulate in him for a long time. Theo suddenly intervened in the conversation and asked why Pierre owed something to his grandmother. That same wise woman. Theodore pointed his finger at the guy and said that after this rescue, he was his debtor and would repay him in the future. Currently, Theodore and Pierre were still standing in the square, and the former begged his friend to stop talking nonsense. Theo was very worried about his friend's life, so he asked him if this was how he was going to repay him for everything he had done. Their conversation was interrupted by piercing screams that were heard very close to them, which is why all three were wary. Not far away, they saw a child stuck in quicksand up to his waist. He was screaming, calling adults for help. The other children somehow tried to pull their friend out, but they didn't succeed, and he was dragged further and further into the ground. Pierre, without hesitating for a second, grabbed a strong rope and rushed to help the boy, followed by Nomi and Theo. The redhead raised his hand above his head, spinning the rope like a lasso, and warned the boy to grab it. The rope landed right in front of the boy, and he grabbed it with a death grip, hoping for the best. Pierre and Theodore together grabbed the opposite end of the rope, and with all their strength, pulled it towards themselves, tugging. But no matter how hard they tried, even the efforts of two strong men were not enough to help the poor child. While Nomi was watching all this, she heard a familiar voice say that it was a very funny sight. He said that people who were afraid of death were funny, and he added that he liked the frightened expression on Nomi's face. Behind her stood Olak, in the form of a little boy, and, smiling widely, said that he missed his bride. He spread his arms wide, and suddenly the darkness around him began to grow, blocking out the sunlight, enveloping him. It was as if a dark barrier had grown around, limiting Nomi and Olak from the outside world, but allowing them to observe it. Olak grinned and invited Nomi to chat a little in private again, to discuss important and topical issues. Through the darkness, one could still see how the little boy, washing himself with tears, desperately tried to escape. Mr. Theo and Mr. Pierre could barely keep the boy on the surface, but they could not pull him out. Nomi ran to the edge of the barrier and began pounding on its walls, but no one heard her. She could not get out. Here they were out of sight, so Olak told the girl to just give up and let the boy die. The child was nothing to her. Then why did Nomi worry as if her own son had died like that? Olak approached her with measured steps and said that before she came to the village, she did not even know about these people. Wasn't such a minor death worth finding water and saving an entire village from drought? He tried to explain to the girl that, no matter what, people were dying, so shouldn't they just get used to it? Olak said that this was just one death, but Nomi did not understand how they could talk about it so easily. God did not value human lives at all, contrary to her beliefs, and she remembered moments from the past. Standing before her with scripture in his hands, the archbishop reprimanded Nomi Bellin, remaining indifferent. The girl resisted and did not want to be God's wife, but he explained that the Almighty had chosen her, such was his will. She prayed for years to be released. She did not want to end her life so early. She wanted to live. The girl was very afraid of death, so she told the divine husband that she would never be able to understand him. Olak incomprehensibly asked what the girl was saying so quietly under her breath, disputing his words. She clenched her hands into fists and explained to the man that no one could get used to death. For them people, everything was different. She faced death every day, even anticipating them. She could not get used to the death of people. And now Olak called all this horror just death, and with a smile on his lips. Now she realized that in fact, God did not exist for the sake of people, as all believers on earth believed. Olak was selfish, so Nomi had no need to either honor him or indulge his stupid desires. The guy quite calmly responded by saying that even if she thought so, it was not her place to choose. This is how the world worked. Olak was at the head of everything, and people only had to follow his script. With one snap of his fingers, Olak could right now make the poor screaming boy go underground in an instant. The fair-haired man approached his wife from behind, putting his cold hands on her shoulders, and asked her to watch with him. He whispered in her ear that everything in this world happened the way he wanted it. It was useless to resist. But the girl could not allow this and quickly escaped from God's grip, running forward. She did not tolerate this. She couldn't let Olak's plans come true, so she confidently went ahead, breaking the dark barrier around her. Olak was only amused by the girl's self-confidence, and he sarcastically asked after her, "Is this really all she is capable of?" But the girl did not hear him. The space changed around her, releasing the girl from the embrace of darkness, leading her into the light. She was able to get out of the trap and found herself back in the world familiar to her. But she could not relax. Nomi ran past Theodore and Pierre with lightning speed, greatly frightening and surprising the guys with her action. She confidently rushed towards the increasingly drowning boy, and without thinking for a second, jumped after him. The sands immediately engulfed her, swallowing her quickly and mercilessly. But she reached the child, trying to help him. Nomi ordered the boy not to let go of the rope and lifted him up, pulling him well out of the sand, helping him a lot. Thanks to the fact that Nomi gave him a lift, the boy was quickly pulled out and he immediately rushed into the arms of his mother. But now there was another problem. Nomi saved the child, but now no one can help her get out herself. The girl was mired in the sand up to her shoulders, quickly going down, but she was ready for this when she ran to the rescue. Theo was simply distraught when he saw this picture. He wanted to make his way to the sands and try to save her, but he was stopped. Running into the sands to help the girl was a stupid, thoughtless, impulsive decision, and then they would both die. Nomi thought to herself that she was fine, and the main thing was that the child was saved. But Theo could not come to terms with the situation. The blonde felt herself losing consciousness, as if she was slowly falling down through the viscous abyss of the world. She heard Olak's quiet voice somewhere below, telling her that she had behaved very rashly. Being unable to renounce anything, the girl had to ultimately renounce herself. It was stupid. Olak smiled affectionately, saying that that was why he liked her. He admitted that she pleased him. The guy told her that even after deceiving fate, she returned to his arms again. She had no other way. And Olak greeted her with open arms, happy that this whole show was over, and she returned to him. Millions of hands of people who had died earlier stretched their bony fingers towards the girl, trying to carry her into the darkness, to everyone else. It seemed that she had no more choice. After all, she was destined to become God's wife, a priestess, a faithful wife. But what is it? Nomi clearly heard Theo's desperate voice cutting through the noise, calling her name. Even Olak perked up when he heard this. Even the sarcastic God, who controls destinies, did not expect such an outcome of events. Theo still managed, despite attempts to stop him, to go to the sands to try to save Nomi. He wrapped the rope around himself, tying it to something stable, and jumped into the quicksand behind it, stretching his arms forward. Nomi felt that she was moving further away with every second, but in desperation, she still tried to reach his hand. And surprisingly, the guy still managed to reach his wife. He firmly grabbed her fragile wrist and pulled. The guy hugged his wife to him as best he could, feeling how anxiously their hearts were beating, and tears appeared in his eyes. The girl found the strength to hug the brunette back, but the memories of what happened next were very blurred. Olak watched all this irritably, muttering to himself that it was very brave of Theo. He could not understand why some insect dared to interfere with his plans, and who dared to take Nomi away from him. God wanted to know who this guy was, who forced the girl to leave the temple and go to certain death. According to Olak's plan, Theodore was just a cameo character in her story. Then what the hell was he doing? Olak urged the bride not to succumb to such nonsense and to surrender to God in an amicable way, so that no one gets hurt. But Nomi didn't even think about submitting to the will of the Lord, so she only grabbed her husband's shoulders tighter. She pressed herself against the brunette's chest and decided once and for all for herself that from now on, she would never give up again. God's face showed rage. How could this girl dare to change his scenarios and create so many problems? Nomi showed God the obscene sign that male player in Silak taught her, and that was the last straw. Olak pulled himself together and decided that since Nomi finally understood what it was like to live, then let her live a little longer. But God was going to make sure that the girl lived, shrouded in regrets about her choice, and soon changed her mind. After some time, Theodore and Noemi came to their senses almost simultaneously, finding themselves in a rather strange place. The girl asked the guy why he rushed into the sand after her, risking his health and his life so much. He said that he wanted to ask her, because she was the first to recklessly rush into the very center of trouble. The girl stopped short. Still, he was right, and it was not for her to talk about recklessness when she herself did the same. Theo, scratching the back of his head, said that the foray into the capital almost turned out very badly for them. But Nomi did not listen to him. The girl's gaze was riveted on something that was located behind the guy's back, and so fascinated Nomi. Theo turned around and was surprised to find Nomi pointing him towards the water. They did it! Found a cave! She said that now they were exactly in the cave, with water that she saw in her prediction. Suddenly, the girl fell to her knees, thereby greatly frightening Theodore. Her hands trembled slightly, just like herself. The girl cried with happiness. She was exhausted, almost died with him. But they managed, did the impossible. Olak was wrong. They were able to find water, avoiding someone's death, which means they had the opportunity to change their destinies. Not only God could decide destinies, and people were not his obedient puppets, they just proved it. Tears rolled down the girl's cheeks. She was finally able to give vent to the feelings that were weighing heavily on her soul. Theodore came closer to her and carefully squatted down next to her, hugging his wife for support. He allowed her to cry and express all the emotions accumulated during this time, while he thought about how to get out of it. The very next day, the commander was busy trying to drill through the ground to get to the water, and it worked. It was not an easy job, but Pierre made a hole in the sand from which clean drinking water flowed to the surface. People gathered around him in a crowd and watched in fascination as jets of water rose to the surface more and more. After some time, thanks to Pierre's hard work, he drilled a whole fountain, which gushed to the surface. People were happy. They had lost hope so long ago that things would get better. But now it really had happened. Having finished his work, the red-haired man approached Theo and jokingly said that Nomi was amazing for forcing him to climb into the sand. Pierre said that he had never seen the brunette so reckless, and he muttered something offended in response. The friend tried to catch the guy and find out why he took such a desperate step, without doubting anything. In fact, Theo himself did not know the answer to this question, and was no less surprised than others by the act he had committed. Theodore told his friend that, allegedly because of the prediction, he immediately rushed after Nomi into quicksand, and the red-haired man replied that since Nomi was able to make him believe this, then she became even more amazing to him. Pierre admitted that, apparently, he was very much mistaken about his friend's wife. She turned out to be not a bad girl at all, but he said that he could not thank them, because the village had long been subjected to this torment precisely because of Olak's teachings. However, the red-haired one promised to at least try to apologize. After all, they had done a lot these days. Pierre promised that he would approach Nojmi and ask for forgiveness for being mistaken about her and being so rude. Theo shrugged his shoulders uncomfortably. Even the commander knew how to apologize properly. But he, even though he was a husband, could not do this. Nomi was just standing in the middle of the square, enjoying the open fountain with others, when she was called out. These were the same couple with whom Nomi had played games in the yard on the first day when it got dark. They came closer to her, and the woman threw a warm blanket over the girl's shoulders, making sure that she didn't get sick. The couple thanked her for the fact that, thanks to her, the miracle that they had been waiting for so much happened to the villagers. Nomi hastened to object to the woman, saying that she had found this water completely by accident and did not deserve gratitude. But she did not listen to her excuses. and pulled the girl towards her, hugging her tightly by the shoulders, expressing her gratitude. It was said that Nomi sacrificed herself and saved her son from death. Her kind heart saved her child and the entire village. The husband, who had been standing behind all this time, supported the woman and said that it could not have been more precise. The woman said that she blessed Nomi's path with all her heart, and this touched the most delicate strings of the girl's soul. Previously, it was Nomi who said the blessings, putting absolutely nothing into these words, sounding hypocritical. And now, for the first time in her life, the fair-haired girl felt what it was like when someone sincerely blesses you for success. At that moment, Nomi's husband approached them, and the woman released the girl from her embrace, leaving her to her husband. The older couple left the newlyweds to chat and said that they would go and enjoy the water. When the couple left, Theo and Nomi tried to start a dialogue, but suddenly started talking at the same time, interrupting each other. They turned away from each other in embarrassment. Theo apologized for interrupting, and Nomi said that it was okay. They started talking together. Theo said that's not what he meant. He apologized for saying that she couldn't fix anything here. He was wrong and he was ashamed for not believing so much and devaluing his wife. Although he should have supported her, he wanted her to not be bothered by the past and to show her that she shouldn't feel guilty about something she couldn't change. Nomi suddenly took his hand after that and hurriedly said that she also had to apologize to him. She asked for forgiveness for saying that Theo was no different from the priests. This was said out of emotion. Nomi smiled at him gratefully and said that he, on the contrary, was the one who always wanted to help her, and she appreciated that. She added that at that moment she was angry with herself, so she lashed out at Theo for no reason, which she regretted. Theo was stunned, because he did not expect that the girl would ask him for forgiveness for this, but he was pleasantly surprised. He concluded their conversation by saying that he was glad he said it, and once again admitted that he was very sorry that he had upset her. The couple smiled at each other. After the conversation, both finally felt light in their souls and that they had become very close. A few more days passed, and it was time to leave. As Theo and Nomi had originally planned, Pierre brought them 2 camels, loaded to capacity with all sorts of things and provisions. He jokingly said that this was still not enough. Theo asked if he really wanted them to take it all away. Pierre said that the path was not short, it was necessary to stock up. The red-haired man winked at his friend and told him not to worry about anything. He was sure that his strong camel would handle it. Theodore honestly admitted that what worried him more than how they were going to go was where they were going to go. Diffusing the situation, Pierre suggested that in this case we should walk all together. At the same time, our legs would get stronger along the way. Having said goodbye to everyone, Nomi and Theo saddled the camels and set off, promising that they would come back to visit. But when they had already driven away, the couple heard the clatter of hooves behind them, which clearly did not belong to their camels. It turned out that Pierre was going to accompany them to the capital. After all, it would take a week to go there. It would be dangerous for the 2 of them. Pierre smiled and said that if they had met robbers along the way, Theo certainly would not have been able to cope alone. Nomi watched with a smile as her friends jokingly argued about which of them was stronger and could cope with the bandits. At first they rode, chatting cheerfully, but the longer their journey lasted, the more tired the monotony became. After a while, Nomi was already yawning at how similar the landscapes were and how uninteresting the road was. Noticing this, Pierre turned to her and asked if the girl was already bored because of their languid journey. To cheer up the girl and himself a little, Pierre suggested telling her a funny story to cheer her up. The girl agreed, and she and the red-haired man talked quite nicely and laughed, driving a little ahead of Theo. At some point, the brunette caught himself thinking that he felt uncomfortable because they looked like a couple. It infuriated him that a few days ago Pierre had boiled with anger at the mention of the priestess, and now he was cooing at her. The path to the capital ran through the steppe. They had been on the road for 5 days, and Pierre said that they would be there in 2 days. Theo then suggested stopping here and setting up camp. But Pierre could not resist scaring his friend with the presence of snakes. In fact, his words were true, but the redhead assured that he could hear the snakes a mile away, so they didn't have to worry. He drove up to Nomi and personally told her with a smile that if a snake appeared in the camp, then let the girl let him know. The group stopped, dismounted from the camels and horses, and together they began to prepare a place for setting up camp. Nomi took the bags off the camels and took them apart, but she had a little difficulty with one bundle. Noticing this, Theo, without further ado, took this bag from the girl's hands, carefully taking it from her hands. He silently helped Nomi untie it, also rummaging a little with the problematic knot. When he had dealt with it, the brunette returned the bag to the girl, and she timidly thanked him for his help. After all the bags were sorted, Nomi was busy taking things to the tent, which the guys had already pitched. Approaching the entrance, she found it difficult to enter with her hands full, but Theo arrived in time to help. He lifted the edge of the fabric tent so that Nomi could pass comfortably. This time, he didn't say too much either. In general, Theo became a habit of helping his wife without further ado if any difficulties arose in her work. He wanted to help his wife and chop firewood, because the way she did it, she could get hurt. But he didn't have time. Before Theodore, Pierre approached the fair-haired woman, who showed her how to properly hold an axe in her hands. The red-haired man smiled at her and said that the first time is always difficult, but once you get used to it, everything goes like clockwork. Nomi thoughtfully told the young man that she had already seen this scene in one of her visions before. Pierre was surprised, because the girl had never told him anything like this before, and asked what she was talking about. Noemi clarified that when she and Pierre were kissing, she saw the moment with the preparation of firewood in the prophecy. The guy immediately turned to his friend in fear, watching his reaction to such words from his wife. Theo smiled wryly, and trying to contain his anger, asked if he had heard correctly what they were doing together. Only now did the blonde come to her senses, realizing that Theo didn't know about it. They didn't tell him. Pierre hastened to justify them, and said that the kiss was needed only for prophecy. It was not a love kiss, but the brunette didn't want to hear their excuses. He turned around sharply and said that he was going for a walk to the stream instead. Pierre wanted to suggest then that they go to the stream together, but Theo firmly refused, piercing him with a murderous look. The commander was stunned. He had rarely seen his friend so angry, and such a reaction made him nervous. Going down to the river, Theodore took off his clothes and decided to swim in the river to rest and reflect. If you think about it, Nomi asked him for the same absurd things, even when they were not yet spouses. Whether it was kisses or an offer to sleep, the girl did not hesitate to offer him this even before the official engagement. But did their marriage really mean nothing? If so, what reason did Theo have to defend her at all? He irritably ruffled his wet hair with his palm. That's right. They were just a sham marriage from the very beginning. They weren't close, so their marriage was nothing more than an agreement with benefits for both of them, and he forgot about it. From the very beginning, Theodore only needed the Furgard family heirloom, and not marriage, feelings, and this love. The guy angrily hit the water with his fist, splashing water around him. He needed to vent his anger. Still, they were similar to Noemi. Although he also wanted to marry not just Theo, but any convenient guy. Theo kept thinking that because of this, he and Pierre kissed. Such a small thing didn't change anything, and he couldn't be angry. The dark-haired man decided to leave the bad thoughts and allow himself to relax. So he dived under the water, deciding to swim. Meanwhile, Nomi and Pierre continued to prepare firewood. She approached the guy and apologized for letting it slip. The redhead said it was better to save the apology for Theo. It wasn't fair to him. She asked if she should explain to her husband that it was for a prophecy, but Pierre said that he still wouldn't believe it. Whatever one may say, it was a real kiss, and it doesn't matter what goals they were pursuing when they agreed to it. The girl was puzzled by this reaction, and the guy said that usually only lovers kissed. Nomi repeated the word lovers in bewilderment, not fully understanding the meaning. Pierre said yes, like him and Theo. The fair-haired girl only now began to realize the situation, and asked what it turns out that she and Theodore had love. The young man did not understand why she asked him about this. After all, they were engaged, and she even ran away from home with him. Realizing that everything was worse than he thought, Pierre explained that love is when you are interested in someone and want to be close. The lovers wanted to touch each other, to care. Did she feel something similar about Theo? The girl did not find anything to answer to these words of Pierre, and instead ran away, saying that she must urgently find her husband. She immediately set off towards the river. Along the way, thinking about everything that her friend had just told her, She admitted thoughtfully that Theodore Fergard was indeed interesting to her. She couldn't deny that. She really wanted to know more about the young man and constantly be near him. She desperately wanted to hug him. Without her husband's touch for a long time, she felt painful and wanted to get back to him as soon as possible. And when Nomi felt his warmth, her heart was ready to break into pieces with happiness. She understood all this now. The girl suddenly froze in place. She was stopped by the realization that so unexpectedly came to her head. It was love. Meanwhile, she had just reached the river and saw Theo, who was sitting with his back to her, waist deep in the water. She froze for a moment, taking advantage of the moment and looking at her husband. She thought that he was beautiful. Her heart was beating at an incredible pace. She could not take her eyes off the brunette or even say something to him. Theodore would not have noticed her for a long time if Nomi had not pulled herself together and called him. The guy turned around and, noticing his wife on the shore, became worried, not expecting that she would find him in this position. The guy's cheeks turned leaden, and he stared blankly at the blonde, frantically aware of the situation. He hurriedly shouted to her to tell Nomi to stand there on the shore and not come closer to the river for now. She didn't understand why. But a moment later, noticing all of Theo's clothes on the shore, carelessly thrown into one pile, she finally realized. The girl turned away, covering her face with her hands and apologizing for accidentally catching the guy in this form. The brunette anxiously replied that he had no clothes to wash with, and the girl tried to change the topic to something else. While the guy was hastily getting dressed, standing with his back to her, the girl unexpectedly asked if there was love between them, in his opinion. Meanwhile, Pierre, alone, healed some kind of lizard on a fire, sitting on a log in front of the fire, also warming up. He wondered if a girl who had given up her whole life for marriage could ask something like that from him. What amazed him even more was that Nomi asked about this with such a face, as if she had heard about love for the first time in her life. While the guy was sitting and thinking about this, a terrible noise was heard behind him, and for some reason his horse reared up. He was lucky that he managed to react in time and jump to the side when the horse began to rage more seriously. Pierre tried to somehow calm his horse, but everything was pointless. Nothing came of it. Turning around, Pierre understood the reason why both the horse and the camels were furious. A large snake crawled towards them, hissing loudly. The guy couldn't understand how it happened, that he didn't hear her earlier, and she sneaked unnoticed towards his animals. The commander immediately grabbed his spear, rushing into the attack. It was necessary to stop this madness as soon as possible. Taking a swing, Pierre fearlessly jumped towards the snake, which apparently was also poisonous and dangerous. At the same time, a serious conversation awaited the couple on the shore. Theo asked the girl if he heard her question correctly. Nomi said yes. She asked if they were in love with each other and wanted the guy to explain what happened between them. The girl admitted that kissing another person felt very strange, but when it came to them, everything was different. She told the brunette that she was confused. The guy wondered if Nomi was suggesting that there was no romance between them. He hung his head in disappointment and thought that she wanted to say that he couldn't be angry about her kiss with Pierre. The young man himself knew about this, so he told Belen that they were connected exclusively by business relations. He was afraid of getting burned. He asked if this was what Nomi wanted to hear since she came for him. All she said was that Theo looked angry when he left. The guy assured her that he was just surprised. The news was not pleasant. She recalled that it was for a prophecy. He besieged her and said that even if their marriage was not real, they should not neglect their marital duty. Theodore didn't want to be misunderstood, but it wasn't that simple. He immediately pressed the girl to the tree. For her, touching was just a way to find out information, but she must understand that for Theo it was not. If she said that by kissing him now, she could see the future she wanted, but he didn't mind doing it. The guy approached her almost closely, almost kissing the blonde's pale lips, but she pulled away in time. The girl lowered her eyes, embarrassed and a little guilty, realizing that she could not do this when he behaved this way. The young man was confused and upset no less than she was, so he quietly asked what was the matter. Has kissing him become hateful? Having guessed the reason on his own, he suggested that apparently she didn't want to, because now she didn't need anything. Trying to contain his disappointment, The guy coldly said that they had to go back before it got dark. Nomi thought that Mr. Theo felt the same way as she did, but it seems that she was very mistaken in her conclusions. Soon, when Theo finished getting dressed, they reached the camp together. It didn't take them long. But when they returned back, they absolutely did not expect to stumble upon a collapsed tent and such a frightening mess. While the guy was looking around the place, trying to understand what could have happened while they were gone, Nomi noticed something interesting. She pointed her finger to the brunette at the body of a dead snake, into which Pierre's spear, whom they had not yet seen, was pierced. The guy fenced his wife off from all this, saying that everything could be dangerous, and it was better not to come close. Nomi and Theodore did not have to wait long for explanations or look for any clues, because Pierre soon returned. He quickly ran towards his friends from somewhere in the forest, and he looked very scared. As they walked, the red-haired man shouted to Theo that things were bad, and the guy's voice was filled with undisguised concern. The commander had to upset his companions with the news that in addition to the collapsed camp, all their animals had escaped. While things were going badly for Theodore's team, the Bellon family temple was also quite turbulent that night.